Thank you for the people who turned up. I'm Toby Oliver, the CEO of Bravo, and I have with me Thomas and John from DreamLabs. DreamLabs is a relatively new solution partner for Bravo, based on the West Coast of the US. I think Thomas and John, they've got a very sort of product focus about how they think about things. I think a lot of the conversations we've had have been really interesting, kind of seeing how you look at how people should be building their applications or the projects they're trying to create. And I think that there's some great perspective I think we can bring on this. I think that's what you're going to cover off today, right? Is particularly for sort of new people coming to app development, how they should think about it. So look, without any further ado, I'll leave you to introduce yourselves and go from there.
Cool. That sounds great. Thanks so much for the intro, Toby. So as mentioned, my name is Tomas, co-founder of DreamLabs, here with John.
Hello.
Also co-founder of DreamLabs. So we are a California-based no-code, low-code agency, helping teams build their 0 to 1 web and mobile apps as a fractional product team. And the way that the focus of today's conversation is really going to be targeted around that product strategy process. So specifically, if you are a first-time founder with a non-technical background, and you've been hearing about the no-code ecosystem, you have an idea, you're ready to build your first web and or mobile app, this is definitely a conversation for you. Also specifically relevant for building on Bravo, if there are design and developer teams that also starting off with an idea, starting off with that complementary skill set of design and development, but are really looking for that framework of creating an initial product template before getting started in actually building anything. This is also a conversation for you, because effectively what we found is that when folks are starting with their initial idea, that's a fantastic starting point. And also translating a concept from an idea into actual developed or delivered features is pretty challenging when you are talking about multiple brains. So if you're just one person and you know exactly what you want to do and you have the skills to build it, like, sure, go for it. But as soon as you have one other person and you need to start communicating your idea to another person to get aligned on what you're both trying to build together, then that translation process is really, really important to nail down before you get started building anything. Because the risk is, of course, any miscommunication leads to wasted time and effort and money, especially in the beginning stages. That's extremely valuable. So we want to be able to get ahead of those. Because we ourselves have experienced, as well as have heard from many of our clients, that the idea that they have in their head, when they communicate it to the developer, what they hear back is, "Oh, great, I totally got it, no problem." Wait a week, a few days, even a couple months, and then what comes back is something completely different, which is just frustrating for everyone. So this conversation is going to be about the strategies in general and the tactics in particular that we've developed as an agency to really hone down that translation process through a structured framework, so that by the time you get from moving your idea to communicating to any other person, you have that translation defined and clarified in a way that really gets ahead of any potential miscommunication as much as possible. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today. So let me go ahead and share my screen. But at a really high level, where this conversation begins is before we get into the specifics and the tactics, really focused on the high-level strategy, which obviously begs the question, what actually is that? Because if you speak to 10 different people, you're probably going to get 10 different definitions of what product strategy actually is. And for us at DreamLabs, the kind of our core understanding is product strategy is effectively the discipline of narrowing your focus. Because from our perspective, building a product is really a journey. There are going to be many twists and turns along the way, but product strategy at its highest level is your kind of control center along that journey, allowing you to always have a sense of where you're orienting, which direction or destination you're trying to get to in the long term, as well as which is the next core milestone you're trying to hit in the short term, and what are the specific moves you need to make to get there. So all of the components of a product strategy are really geared towards keeping you oriented and moving as quickly and as efficiently as possible on that overall journey. So staying focused keeps you on track and keeps that momentum really alive to bring ultimately your idea to reality in the best possible way. And in terms of, from a product perspective, what does that journey look like? Because obviously a journey as a concept is pretty vague. What we found is that our understanding of the different, the framework that we use for understanding the product journey is really around 4 specific milestones that you can really orient your progress around. So after you have your initial insight of your initial idea, the first stage is really that concept validation, where what you're trying to do is as quickly as possible run what a brilliant professor at MIT calls the dog food test, which is effectively saying, if you create the food for a dog, will the dog eat the food? In other words, if you have an idea for a product and you have all these feature concepts, will people actually use it, or will people actually pay for it? So the purpose of that concept validation stage is really within, as quickly as possible, so within 1 to 2 weeks, creating something that you can put in front of an initial set of 10 potential users and then actually get their feedback. So if you are a technical person, or if you're like a design developer duo, then building on a tool like Bravo is a fantastic way to just get something out there as quickly as possible. However, if you're non-technical, you can really think about that initial concept validation as simple as a basic landing page that includes high-level promise of what your product or your idea is trying to do, as well as a few of the high-level feature ideas. Put it in front of someone and say, all right, based off of what you're seeing here, are you willing to download it today? Are you willing to make a purchase right now? If yes, why? If no, why not? And that initial validation is super, super important and can be as kind of rough as just that flyer, really. But if you want to take another step up, then that can be effectively a clickable prototype in Figma, where you mock out the screens of your core user experience, either web app or mobile app, in Figma, and then present that to a user so they can go through the kind of ideal experience without having to actually build the functionality itself. And then the third option is if you want to do a really simple to use no-code tool, like a Glide for mobile apps or a Softer for web apps. They do both have a mild learning curve, and they do have very real limitations in terms of the scale of users that you can bring those products to. But for like a quick and dirty initial validation, valid idea or a valid option. And when generally folks come to our agency, and they have not already done that concept validation stage, we generally recommend for them to choose one of those options to do that initial round of concept validation themselves first, before getting down to build out their MVP with us. Because from our perspective, building that 0 to 1 MVP is really the second stage of that product journey, where You want to have something that is fully functional in terms of enabling the core user experience that you have for your idea, that allows you to have, for example, a mobile app, a fully native mobile app live in the App Store that someone can download and actually start using on a daily basis. Or a web app, like an actual live web app that people can use, make payments on, transactions on a daily basis. And that obviously requires more time than just the initial validation, but it allows you to really get deeper in your learning process. And oftentimes people talk about the importance of learning from your MVP. And that's, again, a really great starting point. But from our perspective, it's important to really define what it is that you actually want to learn before you go ahead and start trying to test and learn whatever. Scientific method 101, you need to set your hypothesis before you design your experiment to test it. So in a similar way, when we're building MVPs with clients, we always start with first defining what the assumptions that go into our product are. And then from those assumptions, defining the single riskiest assumption that we're operating on. And that riskiest assumption is really the purpose of the MVP. Once we actually have the MVP developed, verifying for ourselves that we're able to validate that single riskiest assumption, that's really the goal of what we're trying to do. And if you can do that, fantastic. That really puts you in a position for the third stage of the product journey, which is the quest to product market fit. And obviously that's a whole other conversation, a whole other strategy and framework. The focus of this conversation is really around building your MVP specifically. But product market fit, again, many different definitions. Our perspective is that you have achieved product market fit when you've identified the highest value use case from your highest value user, and are able to really refine your focus on every new release, every new feature that you ship around that highest value use case for your highest value user, to really provide that jet fuel of growth to keep moving forward. Which then brings us to our last stage, which is our 1 to n scale stage, where you have achieved product market fit, and really the focus for your product at that point is around starting to widen your horizon, widen your perspective to be able to really realize the full product vision, grow and scale, and then in scope. Because every step along the way before the scale stage, we really want to be staying as tight and focused as possible. But in terms of that initial round of our MVP, as we were mentioning before, our perspective is that it's important to get explicit on what assumptions you're actually trying to test before you actually launch your MVP and really figure out what you can learn from it. So the framework that we use for identifying our riskiest assumption is from a team of product managers at major tech companies in the US, where at a really high level, we write down explicitly our assumptions that go into the problem we're solving, the solution that we're creating to solve the problem, the feasibility of the solution, the ability of our team to deliver, and then the economics, effectively the business model that operates everything. So by actually having a space to write out what those assumptions are, and then identifying which of those 5 is our core assumption, our riskiest assumption, that gives you one additional lens that you can use when prioritizing for your first build. Because let's say, for example, you have your app idea and you're really excited and you have 100 different feature concepts. That's great. That's a fantastic starting point. But one lens you can use to really refine your thinking is to say, okay, out of these 100 features, which are the ones that most directly bring me to test for my single riskiest assumption? And that can help. It can be one specific lens that you can use to refine your prioritization for that initial build, just to, again, maintain that discipline. But obviously, that's all, the strategy is all well and good. So now we're going to get into kind of the specifics of the product management system that we use to translate a concept into a product roadmap that's ready to be developed. And we, as a bit of context, we initially developed this framework for our own product. So as a former fintech PM, I definitely know the importance of both seeing the big picture as well as some very granular details of a product and understanding how those tie together. And before John and I were working on our agency, we were previously working on a startup, and it was pretty personally frustrating for us to be trying to find a product management system specifically for early startups. Because generally what I was finding was, on the one hand, a Kanban board on Notion or Monday of track your features by, in progress, completed, or in review on one hand, which is very, very granular and not actually helpful from a strategic perspective. And then on the other hand, I was finding tools and resources really for 1,000 plus enterprise companies, where the feature set was really around product managers being able to create pages and pages of documentation for every specific feature, because that's what's needed at that scale. But in terms of what was available in the in-between, we weren't finding something that we could just pick up and run with off the ground. So to solve for that, what we did was reviewed a number of different PM tools, from Jira to Atlassian, even to Monday, deconstructed them, identified the most essential components, and then integrated them into a relatively simple Notion framework that all plugs together. So the components of that framework are what we found to be the core building blocks for any product vision, and that's what we're going to be walking through right now. So the first thing that we start with is our user stories, and we use for this FigJam to create this component and really distinguish two separate elements for our user stories. So one is our user flows. So we understand to be the high-level tasks that your app should be able to enable users to accomplish, for example, onboarding a new user. And then user stories being the specific steps that bring a user from start to finish of a user flow. So for example, within that flow of onboarding a new user, individual stories could be sign up for a new account, add profile information, watch an onboarding video, that type of thing. So that before you get into any feature specs or anything, from the highest level, you can understand what ultimately, not what do I think is really cool to build, but from the user's perspective, what should a user be able to accomplish, and how do they get from A to B for each of those core areas. And one note here is that not every user story that you map out will be live in your initial version. And that's good, and that's okay. Because what you outline now is not what you're going to be ending up with if you're doing it right, in the sense that you can think about your initial user flows kind of map as a architectural blueprint, and then each subsequent release, what you're doing is unlocking new layers of functionality on top of that blueprint. So this should be guiding your focus and your prioritization, but doesn't necessarily need to be 100% what you translate, because what you'll be able to do is iterate on these user stories after each release as you get more feedback. So you should think about this as a starting sketch, not as a stone tablet. But once you do create your initial user flows, then you're ready to start really fleshing out your individual features. So again, just verbally telling a developer, just verbally telling a developer what you have in mind is very likely to end up with misinterpretations along the way, leading to wasted time and money. So what we found is that a few like specific components are really important to fully defining every individual feature that you actually want to be able to build. So first, what user story does it map up to? Because if you're going to spend time and money building a feature, it should enable part of the user flows that you mapped out before. So one, what user story is this feature related to? Two, what does it allow the user to do? So again, not what do you think is fun to build, but from the user's perspective, what should the user be able to do because of this feature? And then three, what are the assumptions that you're putting into this feature? And this is where you can be really clear on both what the feature is and also what it is not. So for example, if you have an e-commerce app and you have a page that displays a list of all of your items, saying, search feature for e-commerce items is a good starting point. And you can also add an assumption. This does not mean like AI powered smart recommendation, algorithm, because that is something else entirely. But that could be what someone interprets, or it could also be what you actually mean. So getting really clear on both what it is and what it is not is what you can flesh out in the assumptions for each feature. And then once you have all of those features defined, then the second thing that we always recommend for people who are building their products to do, and our clients as well, is to map out your prioritization. We use a simple high, medium, low to create that initial round of prioritization. And then whoever is leading the development should go through on a feature by feature basis and note the expected effort or time required for each feature. So that at the end of that process, you're able to stack rank the results. And that stack rank result allows you, again, another filter for your prioritization. So you can say, all right, I had 100 feature ideas, but 40 of them are low priority, high effort. Are those actually required right now? Or you can say, really, I only have budget for 4 weeks of development time. But looking at all the features I have and the time estimated to complete all of them, it's going to take 70 hours. All right, this is the strategic decision point right there. Are all of those 70 hours worth of development, is that absolutely required now? Or can you start to make decisions to really refine your prioritization to stay within any constraints you have? And what we found is that being able to actually see the numbers of hours that each feature is going to require is really helpful for founders or product owners to make those types of decisions, because otherwise it can be really easy to say, well, all the ideas are great and all of them are important, and they need to happen. But by being able to actually have the numbers on the table, then you can be more smart in your decision making. So that's how we set up our features. And then the last note around prioritization is, as a baseline for your initial release, we always recommend 2 different filters to think through when considering your must-have features for an initial release. Because on the one hand, we absolutely always recommend that folks start with their minimum feature set, which is really the features that enable the core product idea. And one way that we use to really help people articulate their core product idea is to imagine that you're in a noisy bar and you're trying to communicate what app or product you're building in one sentence. What is that one sentence? So for example, if someone's like, hey, I'm working on an app called Bumble. It's like Tinder, but the girl swipes first. Essentially, that's the core product idea. Simple. So in the MVP, only features that feed up to that specific experience are the most necessary and the most required. So that's your minimum feature set. And then the second lens that we use is thinking about your magical wow moments that you can create. And these don't have to be super complex. They can be as straightforward as, in a to-do list or in a, habit tracking app. When you press, check, the phone vibrates and like an animation displays. There's a bit of user feedback that you can provide to really reinforce the core user experience, the core user actions, and just make them really feel really good about using the product in the way that you're setting it out. Because we now live in a world where there's so many different products and many of them are very, very mature. Being able to have at least a few of those magic moments really sprinkled throughout your app, give it a bit of extra life that can compensate for the lack of full functionality at the very beginning. So then once you have your features sketched out and prioritized, then the elements, the components of your front end that we always guide clients in building out are first, your wireframes, second, your completed designs, and then third, a table of all of your individual screens. So in terms of your wireframes, I'm sure folks already know this, but the basic idea is you have your list of your features, you have your user flows map. So now what does that actually look like in your product? Your wireframes are your opportunity to really sketch out very basic designs that show roughly what should each screen look like, where should the features go, and how should they interact together to be able to bring the user from A to B in all of those core user flows. And that's really helpful to put something out as quickly as possible so that, again, if you have at least more than one person that you're working with, you can get aligned relatively quickly on what you're trying to build before you go and spend time actually building out the full designs themselves. Once you've completed your wireframes and you're ready for your designs, then it's all about applying your brand guidelines and design expertise to really make the screens come alive, make them breathe. And again, this is definitely where a tool like Bravo really shines and really stands out in enabling all of the full vision of your designs that you create in, for example, Figma, to actually translate over to the finished product that you're working on. And then what we found is particularly helpful is also then creating within our framework a table of all the individual screens that we're building on the front end, so that we can then tie them into the features that we have spec'd out. So we can see like, okay, for the home screen, what are all the features that are supposed to be here? And then also just from a project management perspective, you can keep track of the relative status of all the screens that you're working on. So we find it to be helpful, not absolutely necessary, but that is one aspect that's part of the framework that we use. And then once you have your front end, then the last part that really makes sense to flesh out before you get started in building is your back end. So the way that we think about creating our backend components are one, the database schema, and then two, a table of our API calls. So in terms of the database schema, it's definitely not glamorous, but setting this up before you actually go into whatever backend tool you're building in can be really helpful in, again, identifying any areas of miscommunication before you start building and then find them out later. So we generally use FigJam to map out all of the tables that we're going to be building in our backend, and then also every element of data within each table, and then also how do those tables connect with each other. That's really the purpose of the database schema. And in terms of your API calls, again, this can be really helpful when you are building in a tool like Bravo, where you really do want to think through like what are all of, based off of the features that you have scoped, what are the API calls that are required to enable those features. And by writing those out beforehand, that can just make your life a lot easier when you actually go into your backend tool and actually build those out and then bring them into Bravo and then make sure that they're all bound together. So these components are all around just providing visibility throughout the process, from minor details to higher level strategy. And yeah, once you have all of those aspects, those components built out and ready to go, then you're off to the races. So that's really, it's kind of those are the main components that we generally guide all of our clients into building before we start moving to any actual development. So then in terms of what that kind of general framework we talked about on all those various components, at DreamLabs, we refer to that as our product management OS, and that is a Notion template that we have available for anyone to download and use if we want to get started with it. And of course, if folks have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to dig in. But yeah, in terms of a general approach, that's how we work in getting that initial concept idea for an app into a form that's ready to be ready for a development team to run with. And yeah, I'm happy to dig into anything that might be helpful. Oh, and I think Toby, you might be muted.
I'm muted. Always get that wrong. I have a couple of quick questions. So first of all, how do you choose the riskiest assumption? What's the criteria you use when people are saying, okay, when you say risky assumption, because isn't it the most valuable one? I mean, what sort of criteria do you kind of use to choose that one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So I would say the two components to that are, one, what is the value of it? So like, how important is it for this to be true for your product to work? And then two, how tenuous is your confidence that this is actually true?
Okay.
So if, for example, you're saying like, okay, yeah, this is a really, really important assumption, and we know that based off of 20 years of working in the like trucking industry, that this problem is a really, really important problem to solve, then that's not particularly tenuous, as opposed to someone who's like, my uncle is a trucker and he told me at a party that like he has this problem, therefore I want to build a product to solve it. You don't really have a full grasp and understanding in terms of an initial validation that assumption is true.
Okay. And then I guess, which is almost connected, I mean, in the way you looked at the sort of prioritization and effort, I've seen a few people obviously using like sort of RICE or ICE analysis, where they're looking at sort of reach or confidence or impact. I mean, there's some extra sort of things variables bring in. Do you think about that when in terms of prioritization, or is that, how do you, because I mean, often, you get features which might be really important for some people, but it's a small group of people that it affects. So often I've seen other people kind of bring in extra factors to be able to understand what is the most impactful feature that you can do. So it's not just a few users, it's a lot of users. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely really important. Additional layers of prioritization, which can certainly be really helpful. From our perspective, we generally work with folks that are building their initial versions of their product. And for the most part, what that translates to is about 2 to 4 weeks of development time.
that we try to really refine their focus to. So for that initial lens of filtering, just a simple, prioritization and then effort required is kind of our baseline. But yeah, in terms of like after you initially have a product and there's some more considerations to make, have already a group of like 1,000 users, your product is live, there's different factors, more team members also to communicate with. I think those additional layers of prioritization could be super helpful.
Okay. Has anybody else got any questions that they'd like to ask, Thomas? It was super interesting, by the way. Some really nice ideas you've got there. Anybody else who'd like to ask questions? I guess if no one else has, will the slides be available? I mean, is it possible someone can review this? Because I think some of the slides were easier to see the detail on. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but is it possible to share the slides after, Thomas?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, happy to share the slides as well as in the template for our Notion document, our PMOS. One of the documents that we have in our appendix at the bottom of the template is a how-to doc that really explains in more detail tactically how to use each piece. But in terms of the general concepts that we reviewed, a few years before getting into product management, I was working as a management consultant, and I just I have a PTSD of busy slides because of that, and can't stand it. I've gone the furthest possible direction from that. Never want to see a super cluttered consultant slide ever again. So yeah, happy to send that over.
That'd be awesome. And what's the best way of, if people want to sort of follow up from this, what's the best way of reaching out and contacting you guys?
Yep, definitely. So our website is dreamlabs.pro. And there we have both a contact form, chat bubble, as well as a link to my calendar. If folks want to just book some time and get started with the conversation.
Awesome. Very good. Okay. Well, unless there's any other questions from anybody, is there anything else you guys want to cover off that you haven't discussed already? John, anything from your side?
No, nothing concrete to add. Just thank you for inviting us out here, and yeah, it was a pleasure.
Awesome. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, guys.
Say the last thing to. Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that the last thing to note is that we, in terms of our product management framework, the first stage of all of the apps we build with our clients is going through that process and developing our deliverables around the user flows, features, wireframes, database architecture, all of that. And one aspect that we found is that when clients are coming to us before they're ready to actually start building their initial MVP, and we recommend for them to get started with that concept validation stage. Sometimes they're interested in working with us exclusively on that product strategy process, kind of a 1-week process that we run. So if any folks are interested in just that aspect of really refining their idea, whether or not we're helping with the development or they're taking the development in-house or working with some other outsourced team, that's something that we're really comfortable with, as well as happy to do in supporting folks to really translate their idea into something that they can run with.
Yeah, I think this is probably a really, really important point, right? You're not just about helping them build things, you're helping really get them to figure out what the right thing to build is in the first place. And so, which a lot of people, they get confused there and end up building something without really knowing why they're doing it. So I think that's a really helpful thing for a lot of our users to be aware of, is to making sure they get it right at the beginning before they get up spending a lot of time building something that doesn't really work. That's a really cool one. Awesome. right, well, thank you very much, guys. So we'll make a video of this, and we'll share it around so other people who weren't able to come in can actually see this too, because I think there's some really good content here.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it.
Great stuff.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Ciao, ciao.